Hello, everyone. My name is Timitopo Onitiri, and I'm your host on the Truth to Impact podcast. It's a podcast series where we explore topics on sustainable economies, sustainable businesses, and personal sustainability. The podcast is all about seeking insights, sharing truths, and inspiring actions. Our goal is to spark those aha moments that lead to meaningful changes for a lasting impact. Jaison John is a trusted strategy and economic advisor. Jaison's professional journey began in aircraft engineering, where he developed the foundation of technical acumen and problem solving. As the sole consultant for sustainability and climate action at UNICEF's Gulf Area Office, Jaison spearheaded a transformative 5-pillar climate engagement strategy, fostering impactful partnerships and advancing sustainable development goals for the UN Climate Change Conference COP28. At Avian Co., Jaison established a boutique advisory firm renowned for crafting innovative strategies. Avia offers a unique interdisciplinary approach to addressing the complex challenges faced by clients across the MENASA region. He is an assessor at the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. Good morning, Jaison. Really nice to have you today on the podcast show.
Thank you, Temitope, for welcoming me to this interesting discussion. It's a pleasure to be here.
And so you're a strategy and economic advisor, and interestingly, your background is in aircraft engineering. How did you get there?
It's interesting. Something that I always tell people that I meet is I'm not in sustainability by choice. It's purely by chance. As you rightly mentioned, I started off as an aircraft engineer. And one of the best projects that I did was into doing a feasibility study for an airport development. And the very next project that I got into was into waste management. That was my tiptoe into the world of sustainability. And ever since, I've been working as a sustainability advisor and also a strategy implementation specialist. I've done some interesting projects across the Middle East, to start with waste management. And most recently, I worked with UNICEF in advising their climate action and sustainability strategy for the Gulf area region in the lead up to COP28.
And in addition, you are an assessor for the University of Cambridge Sustainability Institute.
Yes, that's again another opportunity that came by as I finished my graduate studies at the University of Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership. I had the privilege to be an assessor where we deliver sustainability management business certificate program. And over the course of 4 years, I've been fortunate to work with over 400 industry professionals who are sustainability practitioners today.
That must be really impactful. So tell me, you talked about your role working with UNICEF on the sustainability climate change. What did you do exactly for them?
So essentially, we had the COP28 announcement in UAE for last year, where the COP28 was under the UAE presidency, and UNICEF Gulf Area Office realized that they wanted to implement a climate action strategy. They invited me as a consultant to design their 5-pillar climate action strategy. So I was fortunate to develop and design and implement that strategy for the UNICEF Gulf Area region. And also, UNICEF had its first ever pavilion for COP.
Right.
And I had the opportunity to work in setting up that pavilion and working with UNICEF closely in designing and releasing that climate action strategy for the region.
That must have been a very interesting project.
It was. And one of the most interesting projects was integrating climate education, training the teachers on delivering those climate science across curricula in the UAE, which is one thing that I am really proud of. And I'm looking forward to seeing its results in the coming years.
It would be really great to hear your perspectives on the different topics today. And as you know, on the Truth to Impact podcast is really focused on this episode on sustainable economies. Last episode we did an interview with the project director at the Henrik Foundation. So the Henrik Foundation had released the Sustainable Trade Index report, and they had done a study of about 30 economies, and they had focused on 3 key pillars of economic, societal, and environmental. And, very interesting insights that came from that report. I think what would be interesting would be to start with UAE before we deep dive into these key pillars and, looking at other economies. It would be nice to just have an overview of the UAE economy in terms of, what are the key policies of the UAE.
Let me start by reflecting on a groundbreaking milestone that unfolded at COP28. Last year in 2023, UAE held the presidency of COP28. Did you know that it was the first ever UN climate change conference to dedicate an official day for trade? It's fascinating to me that it took 28 years of climate negotiations for governments and other stakeholders to recognize trade as a key driver for climate action. UAE, with its strategic foresight, catalyzed this shift. UAE worked with the COP28 presidency, worked with global institutions like the World Trade Organization, the International Trade Organization, the International Chamber of Commerce, and the UN Trade and Development to build a trade house pavilion. This pavilion essentially acted as a crucible for innovative dialogues and channeling resources, both technological and financial, to trade and sustainable climate action. Did you know another interesting fact? 25% of the global carbon emissions are from the global production and distribution of goods and services. Let that sink in. So, trade plays an integral role in driving both sustainability and climate action. I want to take this podcast from a perspective of looking at the exemplary leadership that UAE has played in accelerating sustainable development through trade.
Wow, these are really interesting facts, but I'm not surprised because the UAE as a government is always ahead in terms of the different initiatives they do to ensure economic resilience. So, Jaison, tell me about the key drivers of economic growth in the UAE.
Thank you, Temitope, for the question. It's interesting to know that UAE has carved itself to be an economic powerhouse in the region. When it comes to the GCC countries, UAE has maintained a stable growth year on year. As per the central bank, the UAE's GDP growth has marked a 4% growth in 2024 with a projected growth over 5.2 in 2025. The first half of 2024, UAE's non-oil foreign trade has topped 1.4 trillion, and they're hoping to cross 3 trillion by the end of this year. When it comes to managing inflation, they have kept a moderate 2.3%. And in terms of interest rates, we are looking at over 5.4, which is quite modest for this region, given the fact that global economies, advanced economies, are decelerating. UAE has been quite agile in terms of policies and fiscal policies and regulations in keeping up with the economic uncertainties of the world that we live in. Now, to answer the question of what are the key drivers for UAE's economic policies, I would look at it at four broad buckets. One would be in terms of its non-oil trade dominance, which is we are looking at for the first half and the first quarter. When we zero in on the first quarter of 2024, it was over 670 billion, which is 141 percentile of the UAE's GDP. The second key driver would be the strategic agreements that UAE has entered into, comprehensive economic assistance partnerships, which is quite significant. Third is in terms of its leadership in terms of green trade. And fourth, UAE has leveraged its leadership both as an innovator and its infrastructure. Did you know that 60% of GCC's re-exports happen through UAE? UAE's ports and leveraging its digital infrastructure and the physical ports.
Absolutely. You know, what I find interesting, and I read a report recently by IMF, has UAE been a strategic economic hub, and the fact that it's opened up its country for lots of innovation and events in UAE. So that really supports what you have just said.
And also another bit when it comes to looking at it from another angle, if you look at the Global Innovation Index, UAE has always featured in the top 30. Did you know that it has one of the most robust 5G networks globally, which again adds value to e-commerce, smart logistics? They have adopted blockchain as their trade platforms, which kind of brings down the paper, both the use of paper and the efficiency, process efficiency through those technologies. And if you look at the ease of doing business, starting up a business, I'm sure you agree that it's so fast and you can do it online. So that's something that I think UAE has positioned itself and carved a niche for itself. If you were to look at the inflow of the millionaires, high net worth individuals and businesses that is relocated, especially since COVID, to the UAE is quite remarkable. And how is that possible? Because of its robust digital infrastructure that the UAE provides.
So some of the countries that performed very well in the STI report all had something in common, at least the top five economies. They all had an efficient trade policy. How would you describe the UAE trade policy?
UAE has interestingly entered into comprehensive partnership agreements with several countries. Some of the countries that have been highlighted in the STI report, for example, Vietnam. UAE has an exclusive agreement with those countries. Recently, UAE entered into an agreement with Indonesia, with India. So these agreements essentially reduces the barriers of entry and the market access. So these are significant. For example, with India, UAE has entered into a 5-year partnership to enhance the trade between these countries to over 100 billion. So this is something that's significant that UAE is doing in its part in accelerating trade and development and market access.
Interestingly, one of the trends that I read in the STI report is the fact that most economies are adopting a protectionist approach, which is different from what UAE has adopted. UAE is an open knowledge that UAE's trade policies are liberal and are open. And that has been a key imperative in driving this growth that we're talking about. So whether it's earlier you talked about more investments into the UAE, and what we've seen is more family offices opening up in the UAE. And as I mentioned earlier, UAE is a global hub. You see a lot of events and a lot of investments coming in.
Yes, and also you will see that there are many organizations that started off in the UAE, grew organically and reaching out to the world. Technology platforms, if you will, that cuts across sectors, educational sectors, healthcare sectors, companies based out of the UAE making a world impact.
Interestingly, I was looking at the top 5 sectors performing in the UAE, and I saw things like your e-commerce and your digital economy, and I couldn't agree more with the likes of platforms like Karim, Noon, Talabat. These have become big giants. And also real estate, tourism, and hospitality. That's what the UAE government is known for. But also interesting is the fact that the UAE government is investing a lot in artificial intelligence. So talking about, the next big frontiers, technology would definitely play a big part in it. So tell me, when you look at the STI report, it talks about technology infrastructure being a key play. So how has UAE positioned itself when you compare to these other top economies?
Yes. So when you look at UAE's technological infrastructure, it has one of the most advanced 5G networks in the world, not just the region, but in the world. So it kind of knows how to play the digital landscape quite well, and they are ahead of the curve, which causes global players to make use of the platform that's already available when it comes to smart logistics. And in terms of the technological innovation, you would see things like Dubai Future Foundation. UAE in itself, especially from a government perspective, they do a lot of accelerator. They are quick to develop ideas, fail fast, learn, and develop better, thriving ideas. And that's the approach, an agile and innovative mindset that is not afraid to take those risks, at the same time, take those learnings and implement it in a sustainable action.
Talking about Dubai Future Foundation, just interestingly, I visited the robotics lab in the Dubai Future Foundation, and it was just amazing the kind of initiatives that are there and how the UAE government is positioning UAE for artificial intelligence, robotics, and that economy. What do you think?
I think it's fascinating. And also, when we look at it from a sustainability and trade perspective, it's interesting to know that Dubai adopted a blockchain technology in their platform. It's called the Dubai Trade Platform, which there's an interesting case study by the World Trade Organization on the same. This is in 2016. We are having this conversation at a global stage in 2024, but Dubai has managed to carve a niche ahead of the curve. And that's something that's quite interesting. Why? Because this platform reduce the time of registering a business, setting up a commercial registry, the documentation, talk about going green and paperless. It builds that. And also the potential to innovate, the number of services are quite high. And Dubai also invests a lot in integrating sustainability into core initiatives. And especially in the UAE, they are already thinking about a national coders competition. There are several competitions, several initiatives to attract young talent, and not just talent locally, talent globally. So this is something that's fascinating that the UAE has done from its leadership perspective.
So we talk about all the great initiatives going on in the UAE, especially relating to the economic pillar. What are the key areas that the UAE government should focus on to deepen its economic resilience and also ensure adaptability?
Thank you, Temitope. In terms of the economic resilience, UAE has charted an economic path that's quite different from its peers. It has woven economic resilience and trade innovation as its core strategy. When you look at the areas for improvement, one is export based diversification. Second would be the local talent dynamics. When we look at export based dynamics, UAE has already crossed a 1.4 trillion for the first half of its non-oil foreign trade for this year, with the goal of crossing 3 trillion by the end of this year. So next year, it would be interesting to see, with its GDP growth projected at over 5.2%, to see how UAE is going to position itself for the non-oil foreign trade. And in terms of its local talent dynamics, we know that it's dependent on expatriate communities, but UAE is doing quite a bit in terms of developing the talents and skills of the future. You mentioned Dubai Future Foundation. Dubai has also set up an AI campus. The national government has set up an coders academy. So these are the government investing in specific talents of the future, both for the local Emirati population and the expat community, which I think is fascinating. One of the most pragmatic approaches that UAE and its peers in this region can take is investing in high-value sectors. Sectors such as aerospace, biotechnology, AI, machine learning, and data centers, if you will. Those are specific areas that UAE has already invested into. For example, I'm sure you've heard of Strata, an aerospace part manufacturer based out of Abu Dhabi. The G42 in Abu Dhabi recently entered into a partnership with Microsoft. So those are things, the investments of the future. In second, UAE could focus on investing in green technologies. As I mentioned, UAE in its presidency brought in trade as an official topic of discussion for climate action, but we could see more investments, as we already see in the Mohammed bin Rashid solar plant, in the Baraka nuclear plant. The investment into clean technologies has been a primary focus, and it would be good to see the scaling up of those technologies. And finally, I would say entering into more FEPA agreements, especially with a focus on the global south. The countries that are listed in the STI report, there is a good mix. And it would be interesting to see how UAE is going to position itself as a facilitator of resources. Yesterday, a few days back, we heard of the Baku breakthrough at COP29, channeling of over $300 billion to developing countries. UAE, in its position as a key facilitator, as a gateway for the West to the East and the East to the West, and as a primary representative, as a voice for the global South, UAE could position itself and leverage its resources.
Wow, interesting. You've talked about a lot of key insights. Interestingly, you mentioned Strata. Last year I had the opportunity of going to Strata, and it's amazing how we perceive UAE as very big on tourism and hospitality. But there is also a lot going on in terms of manufacturing, which is the example of Strata that you talked about, where, there's a lot of aerospace products being developed there. And you talked about the green economy. And finally, you talked about the UAE's partnership with the global south. I know that last year, the UAE, a true master, I believe, invested in solar panels or solar plants in Ethiopia. Do you believe that the UAE government should continue to invest outwardly?
Absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And especially COP28 was a COP that was focused on the global south. If you look at the developing nations, one of the biggest challenge to their economic and sustainable growth is the access to capital and the high interest rates associated with it. And UAE can play a key role in de-risking those investments, both from a financial perspective and a technological perspective. UAE has demonstrated that with COP28. And I think moving forward, there's a lot of scope for public-private partnerships, which is another instrument that UAE has leveraged in the past and can be adopted in Africa and Asia.
So let's talk about the societal pillar. It would be nice to know the labor standards in UAE, and just without being prejudiced. I remember going to Strata, which I mentioned earlier, and what I found fascinating, other than what they're doing there, is that there was a particular part of the production floor where you had literally all women. And when I read some of the statistics, of the, I believe 65% Emirati staff population, 80% of them were women. So it would be nice to your perspectives on areas like gender, um, diversity, and just basically the general labor standards in the UAE.
When it comes to UAE's labor standards, UAE recently revamped its existing labor structure, labor regulations in August of 2024. It brought in a new labor standards to ensure better transparency and to protect the rights of employees. When we look at the wage protection system that UAE has introduced, ensures that the employees are protected for their wages in the country. UAE also in 2022 introduced the unemployment insurance scheme. This is a safety net for a volatile job market, not just in the UAE, but the wider region. I think that's quite innovative that UAE has been the forefront of bringing in those policies and thinking on the feet when it comes to the actual need and fit for purpose policies. UAE, as you mentioned, a right observation about Strata. I was fortunate to work on the target operating model of the organization a few years back. And it's fascinating to see women use cutting edge technology at the shop floor at a grassroots level. And if you would look at a more broader perspective, you would see there are several women in places of influence, both in the public sector, be it ministries as ministers, or in the private sector as chairwomen, as board members of the board, which is quite fascinating and significant in this region. And to look at it from a social sustainability perspective, UAE has been remarkable in attracting global talent. They have recently introduced the 10-year golden visa, which I think is quite remarkable. So if you will look at the population migration, the global migration spots, UAE has been a hotspot to attract technical talent, whether it be sustainability, green skills, investments. You mentioned family offices and the skills of the future, be it AI, coding, machine learning. You would see an inward move, and they have revamped the visa structure to ensure that they attract the best in class talent, and there are employers looking for that talent.
Absolutely. I would agree with you. I came into the UAE myself 3 years ago. And in the last 3 years, I have seen significant improvements in terms of the policies to ensure labor standards, better labor standards within the economy. You talked about the golden visa. And I know recently there was the green visa. These are all new developments to ensure labor retention in the UAE. I also believe that there is a bigger pool of even expert. You see a lot of expatriates coming here with their families because of all these visa programs. I see more opportunities for a wider talent pool in terms of the community of these expatriates and their families. Let's move on to social mobility. So social mobility was highlighted as one of the key indicators for top performing economics under the societal pillar in the STI report. And what is fascinating is that in when it comes to social mobility, education kind of plays a strong impact. Technology innovation plays a strong impact because the success stories is you see citizens that can move through different social statuses because of all these levers and all these pillars. How would you describe social mobility in the UAE?
For me, that's a very interesting observation that you've made through the report, and especially in the UAE. UAE has invested in several strategic initiatives to upskill both the Emirati population and the expatriates. I would like to turn our attention to the National Advanced Science 2031 Agenda program that UAE has introduced, upskill and integrate science studies into school education. There is another very interesting project it's called the Dubai Quality of Life 2033. It's essentially over 200 projects and initiative keeping expatriates and residents at the center of urban living. And they're looking at how can the quality of life, the social quality, the economic quality of life be improved. It has even components of well-being, mindfulness integrated into it. I would say that UAE has invested in specific initiatives to improve the quality of life and well-being of residents and to ensure the economic participation. So if you would look at it from as an expatriate who has come into the UAE, I would say that over a period of time, you would see them move across the social strata.
Just on a final note on the societal pillar, I know that the UAE, as a nation, is largely import dependent on goods, especially. What policies are in place to ensure that it does not trade in goods at risk of modern slavery?
So UAE has a national committee to combat human trafficking. There's a specific body allocated to ensure that human trafficking is curbed, specifically in terms of UAE's relationship to any foreign partners. That's one. And in terms of the trade in itself, UAE is a partner to several trade compliance programs. And finally, UAE is looking at it from a supply chain due diligence perspective to reduce the risk of being associated with such players in the market.
So, Jason, you've worked on, a number of projects with UNICEF, especially the climate change project. And you know that UAE is a leading energy producing nation. It would be nice for you to tell us, what the key environmental standards are and what is the UAE government doing, particularly in areas such as energy management and carbon and, energy intensity.
When we look at the environmental pillar from a UAE perspective, let's look at it both from a global commitment and a local commitment. At a global commitment, recently at COP29, UAE released its NDC Level 3, the version 3 of the nationally determined contributions. It has set an ambitious target to reduce its greenhouse gas emission by 47% by 2035. They have set specific targets for specific sectors. For example, for the industry, they're looking at 27% reduction. And for transportation, they're looking at a reduction of over 20%. And the most significant reduction they're looking at is the buildings. The first thing that we think about when we look at the city of Abu Dhabi or Dubai is skyscrapers and buildings. They have set a target of 79 percentile over the next 10 years, which is quite significant in terms of UAE's commitment to global climate action. When we look at it locally or at a national level, UAE has a comprehensive framework that governs its environmental policy. It's called the UAE Environmental Policy for the country in the next 10, 20, 30 years. They have specific standards to manage their natural resources. The policy also influences decision making when it comes to biodiversity. They have also local level regulations and policies on waste management, on sustainable consumption and production. These are the various initiatives that UAE as a nation has written and is looking to implement over the course of the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. And keeping in mind that UAE was the first country in the region to have set a net zero strategy by 2050.
That's really an ambitious target for the 7% carbon emission reduction. So tell me, are there key, initiatives that would ensure that happens? You talked about, with buildings. What are the other key initiatives that will make this happen?
Yes, another interesting strategy that the UAE has implemented is UAE's energy strategy for 2050. This is quite an ambitious target because by 2050, they are looking to increase their renewable energy mix contribution to the national mix by 50%, which is quite an interesting and an ambitious target that UAE has set for itself. And in fact, it's a role model for other governments in the region to emulate. UAE has already invested in renewable energy technologies. When we look at the Dhafra solar plant, when we look at the Baraka nuclear plant, its investment and its commitment to clean technology is strong. UAE has also entered into a number of green trade agreements that allow it to trade on energy, renewable energy, and it's also developing its standards for carbon markets.
Wow, those are really interesting projects going on. On a final note, what are the key areas that UAE and the entire region should focus on when it comes to environmental issues?
When we look at the environmental areas that UAE and its peers in the region can focus on, I would look at it at three broad buckets. One would be the water, the second would be the waste management, and third would be biodiversity. So because of the geographical location of the country, its access to fresh water is limited. So investing into more technologies that are efficient and that's got a lesser carbon footprint in terms of desalination and water management that the country is already doing, a country like UAE is already invested into, would be good. Second would be in terms of the waste management. I remember being part of a waste management study a few years back, and I was surprised to see that the countries in this region have one of the highest per capita waste producers. A lot has happened since then, and it would be good to see investments into, in terms of waste segregation, more efficient waste to energy projects. And there are some significant waste to energy projects announced in the UAE in partnership with BIA, with the government of Dubai City Municipality. So there are several initiatives. I would love to see more of those projects and initiatives being outlined and implemented in the country. And finally, in terms of biodiversity, UAE is one of the very few countries in this region to have national level decrees and laws governing biodiversity, protecting the local flora and fauna. And that would be good to see adopted by other countries in this region.
Wow. I think those three points are spot on. Those are key areas. I also wanted to add, circular economy to it. Because one of the things that I would like to see in the UAE, in addition, especially you talked about waste management, is how can we also recycle those waste and make it, a sustainable venture. Thank you, Jaison, for today. It's been so many insights that you have shared with us. And I'm hoping that there are so many haha moments that our audience have picked up that would lead to lasting changes.
Thank you, Temitope, for having me. And it was a pleasure to talk on sustainability and trade from the lens of a sustainability practitioner based out of the UAE. Thank you.
Thank you for watching and listening to this podcast. Stay tuned for more episodes.